You are standing on a bare ridge in eastern Turkey. The wind never stops up here. And below you, pressed into the mud like a footprint left by something enormous, is the outline of a boat. Not a small one. 515 feet long, pointed at one end, rounded at the other. And that length is almost exactly the measurement the book of Genesis gives for Noah's Ark. For decades, people told me it was only a rock, a trick of erosion, a shape my eyes wanted to see. Then a research team finally reached the hidden interior of that formation, pulled samples out of the ground, and sent them to a laboratory. What came back did not match the story I had been told my whole life. I am going to take you to the exact spot, coordinates 39 degrees north, 44 degrees east, in the mountains near a town called Doğu, less than 2 miles from the border with Iran. A Turkish Air Force captain first saw this shape from an airplane in 1959. This is not folklore. There are survey logs, there are lab results, there are people who staked their reputations on it and lost. The first time I saw that old black and white aerial photograph, I laughed out loud in my kitchen. I remember it clearly, coffee going cold beside my laptop at 2 in the morning, because the shape was so perfect it looked fake, like someone had drawn a cartoon ship into a satellite image. That laugh is the reason I am telling you this, because I spent the next several years trying to prove that formation was nothing, and every single time I got close, the boring answer slipped through my fingers. So let me start where the obsession started, with the man who saw it first. His name was İlhan Durupınar, and in 1959, he was a captain in the Turkish army, trained in map making. His job was to study aerial photographs for the military, looking for terrain features, roads, anything useful. He was scanning images taken over the Ara province when he stopped on one frame. Sitting in the foothills, at an elevation of around 6,500 feet, was a smooth teardrop shape with high raised sides and a pointed prow. It sat completely apart from every ridge and gully around it, as if it had been dropped there. Durupınar was not a religious crusader looking for a miracle. He was a surveyor doing a technical job, and the shape bothered him enough that he flagged it. The formation now carries his name. The Durupınar site. Here is the detail that first got its hooks into me. In September of 1960, the American magazine Life ran a photograph of that exact formation, with a short note wondering whether it could be the remains of Noah's Ark. Millions of people saw it. An expedition went out that same year, spent about a day on the site, dug a small test pit, found what looked like plain rock and soil, and declared it a natural feature. Case closed. Everyone went home. And that should have been the end of it. That is what I expected when I started digging. A one-day visit, a shrug, a dead file. But the shape did not go away. It just sat there in the mud for the next 17 years, waiting for someone stubborn enough to come back. Because when I pulled the measurements, something did not add up. That quick expedition in 1960 called it a natural mound. But nobody had actually measured the thing properly. Nobody had asked why a random blob of eroded rock would come to a clean point at one end and round off at the other, in the precise proportions of a ship's hull. That question is what pulled me into the next stage. And the next stage has a name that splits every room it enters. Ron Wyatt. Ron Wyatt was not an archaeologist. Let me say that plainly, because it matters, and because I wanted to dismiss him for exactly that reason. He was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee. He had no formal training in geology or excavation, and starting in the late 1970s, he became utterly consumed by the Durupınar formation. He traveled to eastern Turkey again and again through the 1980s, sometimes in brutal conditions, convinced he was standing on the grave of the Ark itself. Now, my instinct with a man like Wyatt is to walk away. An amateur with a religious mission is exactly the kind of source that ruins a serious investigation. I have been burned before, but I forced myself to read what he actually recorded, and this is where the story stops being simple. Wyatt measured the formation carefully. He got a length of about 515 feet. In the ancient measurement system, the Ark is described as 300 cubits long, and depending on which length you use for the ancient cubit, 300 cubits lands remarkably close to 515 feet. That match is not proof of anything, but it is a strange coincidence to file away. Then he brought instruments. In the mid-1980s, Wyatt and his associates ran metal detectors across the surface of the formation, and they reported something that stopped me cold when I read the field notes. The metal readings were not random. They came back in a regular, repeating pattern, evenly spaced lines running across the structure and down its length, as if something metallic was laid out in an organized grid beneath the soil. He flagged those points. He claimed that when they dug at some of them, they pulled up material he interpreted as iron fittings and brackets, and pieces of what he believed was petrified, laminated wood. He sent samples off for testing and reported that some contained iron and carbon and organic material that should not be present in a plain lump of rock. And here is the moment my skepticism first cracked. Just a hairline. Because I had assumed Wyatt was seeing shapes in clouds. But a metal detector does not see shapes. It responds to metal. Or it does not. Either those regular readings existed in the ground or they did not. So I went looking for someone who could tell me whether the ground itself had a pattern, and that search led me to the radar. In the summer of 1986, a ground-penetrating radar specialist joined a survey of the site. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy into the earth and reads what bounces back, building a picture of what lies beneath the surface without digging. It is used in real archaeology and real geology every day. It does not care about the Bible. The team ran scan lines across the formation, and according to the results that came back, the radar picked up regular reflections underneath the surface, structures that appeared symmetrical and evenly spaced, running along the length of the shape. Wyatt and his people interpreted these as the buried remains of walls, internal chambers, a central corridor running down the spine of the vessel. When I first read that, I sat back from my desk, because a natural rock formation, eroded by wind and water over thousands of years, should be a chaotic mess on the inside, random, lumpy. There is no reason for erosion to carve neat parallel walls into a hillside. And yet the radar readings, at least as they were reported, showed a pattern with a kind of order to it. That is the piece that turned my curiosity into obsession, not the shape, the insides. But therefore I had to be honest with myself. Ron Wyatt was not a neutral witness. He desperately wanted this to be the Ark. He had other famous claims that mainstream scholars flatly rejected. A man who wants to see something that badly can convince himself that noise is a signal. So before I let myself believe any of it, I had to do the hard thing. I had to build the boring explanation as strong as I possibly could and see if it held. And this is the part of my journey I need you to stay for, because this is the section that nearly ended the whole thing for me. If you are the kind of person who is already sure this is just a rock, good. So was I. Let me show you the case I built against myself, and then let me show you the exact moment it fell apart. The conventional explanation has a name. Geologists call the Durupınar formation a syncline. More precisely, a doubly plunging syncline. Let me put that in plain language, because when I finally understood it, I honestly thought the mystery was dead. Imagine layers of rock, laid down flat like a stack of blankets. Now imagine those layers get folded downward into a long trough, a dip that plunges down at both ends. Over time, the softer surrounding material erodes away, and the harder folded rock is left standing in relief. Under the right conditions, that process can leave behind a long, curved, boat-shaped ridge with raised sides and pointed ends. No flood required, no ship required. Just rock, folding, and erosion. This pattern is not unique to one ridge. The official story keeps explaining the surface and leaving evidence out, so I gathered the records into a collection of books. Tonight, pull those coordinates up on a free satellite map. Each volume stands alone. Together they give the full picture. They are first threshold, deep signal, and hidden systems. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description, or the pinned comment. Now let me show you the geologist's case against all this. A geologist named Lawrence Collins studied the site and, together with a colleague, published a detailed takedown. The paper argued, point by point, that everything Wyatt found had a natural cause. The boat shape was the syncline. The surrounding mud, Collins argued, came from mud flows that wrapped around a stubborn core of rock, streamlining it into that hull-like form, the way water shapes a stone in a river. And the iron? The metal readings? Collins had an answer for that too. The region is rich in volcanic rock full of iron minerals. Concentrations of iron-bearing rock, he argued, could produce metal detector readings and even, in weathered form, the look of rusted fittings, without a single man-made rivet anywhere. I sat with that explanation for a long time. It is a good explanation. It is careful, it is grounded in real geology, and it comes from a trained scientist rather than an enthusiast. I wanted to accept it. It would have let me close the file and sleep. But then I did something that broke it for me. I went looking for the geologists who wanted it to be the Ark, and asked what they concluded. Because here is what most videos never tell you. There is a geologist named Andrew Snelling. He is a young Earth creationist. He believes in a literal global flood. If anyone on this planet had a motive to declare the Durupınar formation the real Noah's Ark, it is that man. His entire worldview would be vindicated by it. And Andrew Snelling looked at the site and said, it is not the Ark. He examined the formation and concluded that the rock is folded and layered in a way that is completely inconsistent with the remains of a wooden ship. He argued that a true global flood would have laid down these very rock layers, meaning the formation is made of flood sediment, not floating on top of it. In other words, the man who most wanted it to be the Ark studied the stone and walked away. Think about what that did to me. My boring explanation and my believer's dream had collided, and both the skeptic geologist and the creationist geologist agreed on the same verdict. It is a natural rock formation. That is a rare thing in this world. When your fiercest opponents agree, you should probably listen. So I almost quit. I want you to understand that. I had a clean, double-sourced, scientifically respectable answer, and I was ready to let the shape in the mud go back to being just a shape. But something would not let me. Because both of those geologists were explaining the rock. They were explaining the shape, the fold, the layers of stone. And the thing that had grabbed me in the first place was never really the shape. It was the pattern underneath. It was the radar readings. It was the evenly spaced metal. And a syncline explains the outline of a hull beautifully, but it does not obviously explain why the inside would scan like it has organized structure. That question was still open. Nobody I had read so far had actually gone inside the formation with modern tools and settled it. And that is exactly when the story jumps forward, past Wyatt, past the old arguments, into the last few years. Because it turns out somebody finally did go in. For a long time, serious institutions would not touch the Durupınar site. And I understand why. Ron Wyatt's name was attached to it, and his other claims had damaged the whole subject. Any professional archaeologist who announced they were investigating the boat-shaped formation risked their entire career being reduced to a punchline. So, for years the site sat there, famous and abandoned at the same time, too tainted to study, too strange to forget. That silence is the part that started to genuinely bother me. Not a conspiracy with men in dark rooms, something quieter and, honestly, more human. A site that could be examined with real equipment, sitting untouched, not because the science was impossible, but because the reputational cost of even looking was too high. The people who could have re-examined it chose not to, and they had a career-shaped reason to keep choosing not to. But then a group decided the question was worth the risk. In recent years, a joint research effort came together involving Turkish universities, including Ada İbrahim Çetin University and Istanbul Technical University, working alongside researchers connected to Andrews University in the United States. They formed a team dedicated to studying Mount Ararat and the boat-shaped formation with modern methods. One of the leading figures who spoke publicly about the work was Faruk Kaya, a vice-rector at Ada İbrahim Çetin University. And they did the thing nobody had properly done. They did not just stand on top of the formation and guess. They took rock and soil samples directly from the site, dozens of them, and they sent those samples to a laboratory for real analysis, dating, chemical composition, content. When I first read that a proper lab study was underway, I felt that old 2 in the morning feeling come back. Because for the first time in this entire journey, the argument was going to move out of interpretation and opinion and into hard data. Either the ground would say something ordinary, or it would not. They pulled more than 20 samples, and they ran them for age and for content. Here is what came back, and here is where my hands actually went cold reading it. The laboratory analysis of the material from the site reported the presence of clayey materials, of marine materials, and of remains associated with sea life, in the soil taken from around and within that formation, thousands of feet up in the mountains of eastern Turkey. And the dating of the samples placed the relevant material in a window running from roughly 5,500 years ago to around 3,000 years ago. Read that again slowly, the way I did. Marine material, sea life residue. On a mountainside more than 6,000 feet above sea level, over 700 miles from the nearest open sea, in soil that dates to the same broad era that flood traditions across the ancient Near East point to. Now I have to be careful here, because I promised you I would never do to you what the clickbait did to me. This lab result does not prove the formation is a wooden ship. It does not prove Noah. The researchers themselves were cautious. They said more work is needed. that the dates and the materials are a beginning and not a verdict. Farooq Kaya and the team framed it as a reason to keep investigating, not as a signed confession from the past. But sit with what it actually is. For 60 years, the strongest argument against this site was that it is nothing but ordinary mountain rock, just a fold in the stone, just erosion. And now the ground itself, sampled and dated in a laboratory, has come back carrying marine material and sea life traces, deposited in a time window that lines up unnervingly well with the oldest flood stories humanity ever wrote down. That is the detail that ended my search and started a new one. Because the boring explanation, the syncline, the mud flow, the iron-rich volcanic rock, explains the shape, it explains the metal, but it does not comfortably explain why lab analysis is reporting the chemical fingerprints of the sea, high in a mountain range, in soil from a formation shaped exactly like a described ancient ship, dated to exactly the era the story demands. And here is the piece I keep coming back to, the thing I cannot put down. Every stage of this journey, someone told me the mystery was solved. The 1960 expedition dug one pit and said natural. The geologists explained the fold and said natural. The whole scientific world agreed. The shape was just a shape, and every one of them was explaining the outside, the surface, the stone. Nobody, for 6 decades, went deep enough to ask what the ground itself was made of and how old it was. When someone finally did, the answer was not the clean, boring, closed door I had been promised over and over. It was marine sediment and sea remains, thousands of feet too high, in exactly the right shape, at exactly the right time. I started this obsessed with a coincidence of shape. I ended it staring at a laboratory report about the chemistry of dirt. And that report is why I no longer laugh at the aerial photo the way I did in my kitchen all those years ago. Let me be square with you about where this stands, because you deserve the honest version, not the hyped one. The Durupınar formation has not been proven to be Noah's Ark. It may never be. Serious geologists still hold that the shape is a natural syncline, and their explanation for the outline is genuinely strong. The recent sampling work is early, and it needs to be repeated, checked, and published to the highest standard before anyone can build a monument on it. But that is not the same as the story I was handed. I was handed certainty. I was told, again and again, that this was a solved case, a rock, a delusion, a punchline, nothing to see. And what I actually found, when I followed the trail down to the primary sources and the lab data, was not certainty at all. It was a site that the experts wanted to dismiss, that was left untouched for years because studying it was too dangerous to a career, and that, the moment anyone finally sampled its guts, started giving back answers the easy explanation never predicted. That is the feeling I could not shake, and it is the feeling I am handing to you now. The sense that a door everyone swore was closed and locked was actually never even properly opened. That the thing in the mud has been sitting out there this whole time, at those coordinates near the Iranian border, quietly refusing to be nothing. If you have made it this far with me, then you already know you are not the type who takes the tidy official answer at face value. You are the kind of person who wants to see the pit dug, the sample dated, the radar line drawn, before you agree to stop wondering. That is the only kind of person who ever finds anything. The ones who accept the shrug and go home never do. So here is what I want from you, and I am asking directly, because I know this audience reads in silence and moves on. Tell me in the comments what you make of the marine material in that soil. Sea life residue, more than 6,000 feet up a mountain, dated to between 5,500 and 3,000 years ago. Is it flood evidence? Is it ancient geology? Or is it something the researchers themselves have not figured out yet? And tell me where in the world you are watching this from, because I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. If you want to keep walking these trails with me, the ones everyone else swears are dead ends, then come along, because we are far from done. There is another site I have been circling for months now, a place where survey teams recorded a structure buried under the earth that predates the pyramids by thousands of years, and where the official date was quietly revised more than once. I have the records. I am putting the pieces together, and when I have followed it all the way down, you will be the first to stand at the bottom with me. The captain saw the shape in 1959. The believer measured it in the 1980s. The geologist explained it away, and only now, after all this time, is the ground finally starting to talk. I do not know yet exactly what it is saying, but I know it is not saying nothing, and I am not walking away until I hear the rest. Before you go, let me tell you where this really goes. What you just watched was only the overview. Inside, I pick up exactly where this video stopped. And you can ask me your own questions right there, where a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone, you'll belong with fellow mystery lovers inside the Unexplained Society. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, no risk. Now here's the real mystery. Why has no one been allowed to dig at this site? The new scans finally explain everything, and what they reveal may change how you see all of it. It's starting right here.